But that didn't work.
They gave him
No,
a double.
good
morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to this month's edition of the Rancho Bernardo Historical Society Speaker Series. I'm very happy to see another full house. We're doing very well here. My name is Vincent Rossi. I'm the coordinator of the program. Happy to welcome you. I always start asking people to please silence or mute your iPhones, which I was able to remind myself to do even before I walked in here, which is very good. But, and I also want to briefly alert you to next month's program. On July the 8th, we will present a brief history of San Diego's Chinese American community and the history of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. And our speakers will be Jacinta Wang, the executive director of the museum, and Michael Yi, a historian and educator from the museum. So mark that on your calendars. We're very happy today to welcome Professor Javier Gonzalez-Meeks. Professor Gonzalez-Meeks has been a assistant professor of history at San Diego Miramar College for the past 5 years, and he will be speaking on the subject of Black Vacqueros, a new aspect, well, and further aspect into Western history, which I think all of us are looking forward to learning more about. So without further ado, happy to introduce Javier Gonzalez-Meeks.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you. Can everyone hear? My son is immunocompromised, so that's why I wear the mask. So can everyone hear me fine? Okay, perfect. It's hard sometimes. I'm like talking and it's like I'm breathing. I feel like Darth Vader sometimes behind a mask. I'm like breathing really hard. Like I just ran a marathon. So, well, thank you for attending on your Saturday morning. I know other things you could be doing. I'm glad you're here listening to this presentation of Black Vacqueros. As Vince said, I teach at Miramar College. I also teach at Cuyamaca College. My wife is also the department chair over there of history, also at Cuyamaca. So I do a little help with her because she's the wife. She says, help me out with the class. I can't say no. And so here I am teaching. It's part of a presentation I gave, I think it was a year or two ago for Black History Month, looking at Black Vacqueros. Before we get started, something I want us to kind of just get us in a mind frame when we have our stagecoach right here, so it's already kind of there, is what comes to mind when you think about the Wild West? What comes to mind when you think about cowboys? You don't have to answer, just reflect. What comes to mind? I know for me.
That's
There you go. You got Clint Eastwood, right? No, Outlaw Josie Wells. Right, one of my first cowboy movies I remember watching. The good, the bad, the ugly, right? And so you have, these are the iconic cowboys you have. John Wayne, there's an airport named after John Wayne. And they have Sam Alley. I love his voice. I love his voice. So you have all these iconic cowboys. But one thing we're going to be talking about in this presentation is not so much a lost history, because history is not lost. You just have to find it. It's there. But it's untalked about history. A history that is kind of overlooked. And that is looking at the Black Cowboys, or Black Vacqueros. And just to kind of put into perspective, 1 out of 4 cowboys are black. Right? So think about it, during the Wild West, when you think about, the good, bad, and the ugly, you should have had a lot more of a population of black characters, black people involved. But a lot of times, racism, stereotypes, all that is to prevent that. But times are changing, right? And the narrative is changing. And so we're going to look at a couple, not a lot. We are going to look at a couple of very infamous black cowboys and cowgirls as well. And hopefully that will inspire you also to go out and research and dig in more to it, into the histories of some of these very famous black cowboys. And before we get into it, because I teach history, how did this all start? Right? How did this all start? Well, we have to go all the way back. This morning I was editing my slides, but it's fine because I had the pictures a little bigger, so I apologize. Right here we have, colonial Spanish America, right? And you can see this right here. You have present in Mexico, you have Texas, you have Arizona, New Mexico, California. And so that was all part of the claimed territory of colonial Spanish area. A lot of the high population density for colonial Spanish Mexico or colonial Mexico was literally Mexico, the fertile area. that's for another discussion, but it was a volcanic soil, great for agriculture. And if you know our region, not so great for agriculture in the Southwest. You need a lot of irrigation, you need a lot of water. So it was harder to bring people out from a great agricultural area into less favorable agricultural areas. And so Spanish started to use this Texas region as an area for cattle raising. Wasn't that popular, but it was a resource for cattle raising. Shortly we're going to see that by the mid-1800s, after the Mexican independence, had a huge, large Latin American independence movement. It all had to do with Napoleon. So we see the breakaway of a lot of these Spanish colonial colonies away from the Spanish crown. And so Mexico will claim its independence. And something to keep in mind. Mexico, Mexicans, stereotypically, brown skin, right? But you have to keep in mind too, a lot of the Mexicans were Spanish, colonial Spanish. A lot of them were white European Spanish. A lot of them Creoles. And so for a lot of them, they wanted to whiten the population in areas that were not highly populated, because you have the English that are coming over, you have the French, and you have the Russians. The Russians are coming also. So they wanted to whiten the population. And so in doing so, they started Mexico opened up its borders to U.S. immigrants, specifically Anglo immigrants. The issue is Mexico, in this independence, abolished slavery. They abolished slavery. So what's going to happen? Well, Mexico allowed the U.S. white Anglos, to come into the to go to Mexico with their black slaves. The stipulation was they could not, further slavery. That means they can keep their slaves, but they can't, to continue the operation of slavery. They can't continue for more people to enhance slavery. And also they had to become Mexican citizens, and they had to convert to Catholicism. A lot of them were Protestant. So that's how we start to get more and more of a larger population density in Texas. And we start to see the domino effects that happens. Eventually, Santa Anna will change the constitution of the Mexican government. We'll eventually see Texas. And it wasn't just Texas, too. A lot of states in Mexico claimed independence. Basically, Mexico went from think about our own U.S. history. We started off with the Articles of Confederation, so more state-based, and then we went to Constitution, more federal-based, right? Mexico did the opposite. It started off with more state rights, and then when Santa Anna wanted more power, but he was a little money hungry, he was more power hungry than that. He wanted more centralized power. So for a lot of states, like Texas, they're like, no, we don't want this. So you have Texas, California also claimed its own independence. Michoacan, so you have a lot of different states. So basically, President Santa Anna, General Santa Anna, starts marching around to different areas in Mexico, trying to get people back to different states back into Mexico. And eventually it will meet up, and that's where we have the Battle of the Alamo, and a battle between Texas and Mexico. Texas will gain its independence, join eventually with the United States. We have the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that will bring Texas into the United States. And then by that time, you have this larger black population, black slave population in Texas. So what we have is right during the beginning parts of the Civil War, a lot of the white plantation owners, a lot of the fighting didn't happen in Texas, the Civil War fighting. But a lot of the Texans, a lot of the Confederates, they wanted to help out their brethren. So what they did was they would go join the fight, but they would leave their black slaves behind in managing the cattle. And it's that period. It is that period in the Civil War that a lot of black slaves are going to get a lot of the skills they're going to need of dealing with cattle raising, riding, all of that, shooting, all of that. Because you are going to have bandits out there that are going to try to take the cattle. So all the skills that develop, they're going to help out a lot for the black slaves. Eventually, after, we're going to see with the Emancipation Proclamation and Reconstruction era, and even though with the Reconstruction, bringing African Americans, giving them more Freedmen's Bureau, into the United States as free citizens, with the slave codes and Jim Crow laws, we have a lot of the racial segregation. So it's harder for a lot of blacks to find jobs. But it's actually more, becomes more demanding for cattle raising for blacks, for a lot of the free blacks. Because they can go out on these trails, they have to deal with a lot of the drama. They already have the skills necessary. They already know about the cattle. They already go on these large cattle trails going from present-day Texas. And why they're going up here to the north? The demand for cattle, beef, the demand for burger raises up. The demand for ribeye steak rises. And what we have is post Civil War, the attention becomes now the Transcontinental Railroad, a railroad going east and west. So that will connect a lot of the South, a lot of the Southwest with the East Coast, a lot of the industry. Think about industrial packing industries, right? So what you have is these black slaves that are now free blacks that have the skills necessary to handle and move all the cattle in Texas, Indian Territory, Oklahoma is not a state yet, and make their way to these different trains and different operations. So highly demanded during this period. And despite that, a lot of black cowboys will face a lot of discrimination, a lot of Jim Crow laws also. They'll go to a saloon, and it's just like the saloons you see in the Clint Eastwood movies, right? You're going to have, your saloon, your brothel house. You'll have, it's very limited. But the restaurant, the black cowboys will be limited on where they can go. They won't be admitted. So for a lot of the cowboys, they'll just hang outside. They'll stay with the rest of the cattle, look after them. But it's interesting is that it's within the groups. The group dynamic with both the white cowboys and black cowboys working on these cattle trains, there was no racial animosity, right? It was because they had to work together. You're out in the wide open. Right? You have to ensure the job is going ahead. You're going through Native American land. They don't want you there. Right? You're going through their land. So you have a lot of angry Native Americans attacking you. You have to work together. Right? You have to work together, take care of the cattle, protect each other. So the life out on the range, a lot different. A lot different when you think about racial discrimination. One example is from this quote from Nat Love. It's a quote from his own book, and we'll talk about Nat Love in 1 second. And he quotes, "A braver, truer set of men never lived than these wild sons of the plains, whose home was in the saddle and their couch, Mother Earth. With the sky for a covering," he wrote, "they were always ready to share their blanket and the last ration with a less fortunate fellow companion, and always assisted each other in many trying situations that were continually coming up in a cowboy's life." So this is quite amazing, right? So from his own perspective, it's like, hey, yeah, we were working hard. It was tough work, but all this nasty stuff once you get into like the city, that didn't happen. We had to work together. We shared together. We lived together. You had to look after each other. Wild animals, Native Americans, all of that. Bandits out there also. So you had to protect each other so you can live. And so it created this different dynamic during this period of the Wild West with our cowboys. I earlier took out Jonathan Majors because I know he's going through a lot of issues right now. So I apologize about that. So it is a plug for the movie, though. It's not just Jonathan Majors. And Heart of Their Fall. It's a Netflix movie that's based on a lot of black cowboys and cowgirls. It's a fictional movie, but they use a lot of the historical figures in it. So it's an interesting story. The first 5 minutes is kind of cringy, but other than that, it picks up as a good movie. But Nat Love. Nat Love was born a slave in Tennessee. His parents were both slaves. His father, who worked out in the field, somehow learned how to read and actually taught Nat Love how to read as well, which is very unique for a lot of black slaves during the abolition period. Eventually, after his dad would pass away, Nat Love would pick up work as doing a lot of odd and end jobs. And a lot of it was his horseback riding, a lot of his skills with that. So he would then make his way to the Texas Panhandle. He'll work for the Duval Ranch. And the Duval Ranch, he's on that cattle train, going from the Duval Ranch going all the way up into, Missouri. And he's there that he hones in his skills with sharpshooting, horseback riding, and he does it for a couple of decades. Eventually, there's a story, and a lot of what we get comes from his book called The Life and Adventures of Nat Love, better known in cattle country as Deadwood Dick. He writes that at the in the 20th century, early 20th century. We don't have a lot of facts to fact check Nat Love, but he's a fascinating character. He claims to have met Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, so it's a very interesting fellow. How he got the word Deadwood Dick, it was actually in the city of Deadwood. As their cattle train was going through, it was on July 3rd. So the city was getting ready for 4th of July celebration, and then there had a lot of rodeo competitions. And Nat Love participated and won apparently every single competition there. So it shows again the skills of horse riding, of cattle training, of rope work, of sharpshooting, all of that. So it shows those skills that Nat Love honed in as a cowboy. You would eventually notice the change of the times, right? More and more industrialization is coming into the West. So he's like, the life of the cowboy is going to change. It's going to change. So he picked up a job as a porter, basically, running errands on the big steam trains. And that's how he will eventually find his way, going through Colorado, Wyoming, eventually sailing down here in Southern California, in Los Angeles, where he eventually sit down and, write his book, and eventually pass away of natural causes. But Nat Love provides a fascinating story of the skill, and it gives us a little glimpse of the Old West or Wild West from a black perspective. That's a lot different than we normally see from, like a Clint Eastwood movie. We have another fascinating individual. Her name is Joanna July. Joanna July is a black Seminole. During the period of the Trail of Tears, a lot of the Seminole, Creek, Choctaw, instead of making their way to the southeast and making their way into Oklahoma, a lot of them just went to Mexico. A lot of them went to Mexico. Screw that, we're not going to that reservation. We'll go to Mexico. And so there was actually a small city in Mexico, still there, Nacimiento de los Negros, the city of the blacks. Right? And a lot of them are of black Seminole descent. And so this is the story of, it's a short story of Joanna July. Who is she, right? Well, Joanna July, she was raised on a farm. She learned how to tend goats and tend her cattle. Her dad taught her a lot of these skills. Good skills on the farm. And eventually, after her father passed away, she'll take on those skills, and her skills will catch the eye of the United States Army. They're right there across the border, Texas, and they notice her skills. Like, hey, we need someone. And remember, there's no big wall yet, right? You can just literally just walk over the dirt, and you're from Mexico to the United States. And so the U.S. Rangers are like, hey, we need help. And they notice how she broke horses. It was a very interesting technique. She'll take the wild horse by the mane and walk it into the Rio Grande River. And right when the horse is about neck high, right, she'll sit on it. And the horse will start bucking and go crazy. And she'll basically force the horse to get tired. And it's when that horse gave up, she broke the horse, that's when she broke the horse. And then she'll just bring the horse out of the river. So a fascinating technique, right, for this young lady to break in horses. And the U.S. Army were like, wow, we need her help. And so they asked her for help, and she did so. She gained a lot of notoriety for her skills in breaking horses. One thing that she did not like was the domestic life. She was married once, and the story goes that she burnt beans, and she couldn't cut fabric right, and her husband was like, oh, good Lord, no. And he's like, no, screw you, man. And so she was gone. She was gone, married twice. She didn't have it. Right? Her story was like, she'd rather walk around her house barefoot, hanging out with her goats, than having a husband just on her, just rambling on. So that was her life. That was her life, Joanna July. So Kathy Williams, born a slave, will eventually sign up for contraband. I'm sorry. She lived in Missouri. Missouri was a slave state. And so when the Union Army took over Missouri, the status of slave was considered contraband, right? So she was considered contraband. So she was with the U.S. Union Army as a cook and as basically a nurse looking after the soldiers. Eventually, she would join with the U.S. military, but she would dress as a man, William Catholic, right? She'll cut her hair, pretend to be a man. And this happens a lot in the U.S. history. Revolutionary War, Civil War, a lot of women participating in fighting by dressing as men. It's like, well, did anybody check? Well, they did have medical checkups, but no one checked below the waist. No one checked below the waist. They just assumed, okay, it's a dude. They didn't check. So Kathy Williams, served 2 major military battles. Eventually, she'll be honorably discharged when she actually caught smallpox, and a surgeon actually had to do a full check of her body. Like, oh wait, you're a lady. And so she was honorably discharged. She'll eventually get well, but the lingering part of the smallpox will still affect her. She'll then join up with the Buffalo Soldiers, the legendary Black Regiment of the Union Army. And their role was, pacifying the West, allowing for more settlers to enter into conquered territories. And so that was the new role she took on. Only a few people. She still dressed as a man. It was still dangerous for her to claim as a woman in a group of men. And so she lived her life as a Buffalo Soldier. Eventually she'll get injured, she'll retire, she'll ask for a pension. And there have been some women, like Deborah Sampson from the U.S. Revolutionary War, that actually received a pension from the U.S. military. She denied. She was denied that, and eventually she'll die of the illness that she had. But it shows again another interesting person, in the Wild West, calming the Wild West part of our story. Bass Reeves is getting a lot of cool notoriety, a lot of press lately, and it's great. It's great. It's not because of that big old mustache. Bass Reeves, also born into slavery, is named after his grandfather, Bass Washington. His master, his name is Reeves, so that's why he took on the name Reeves. He was one of the first U.S. Marshals in the Indian Territory. And that's not saying there were other black marshals as well. So he was one of the first ones out west of the Mississippi River. And we're going to look at some of the exploits of this marshal. When the Civil War broke out, he went with his master, and there was a poker game, something happened, and Bass Reeves broke his master's jaw. So, ouch, right? It's like, good for you, but eek, right? You better run. And he does run. He takes off into Indian Territory, Oklahoma. And it's in Oklahoma where he, lives with the Seminole, Cherokee, Choctaw Creek indigenous people and learns a lot of life, how to track, how to look after animals. He learns their language. He learns how to scout. So he learns a lot of invaluable skills during this period. You also learn, hone in on his firearm skills, which is going to be very important as a marshal. So this was where he was living during the Civil War. When the Civil War was ended, he would leave and go to Arkansas. Arkansas, you think, okay, he's retired, he has a wife, 10 kids. You think 10 kids will keep him at home? No, it doesn't. My 2 kids barely keep me at home. So I get it. He's had 10 kids, but his skills of understanding the territory, the language itself, especially in Oklahoma. When you think of Wild West, Oklahoma had a high population density of murdered marshals. More marshals had been killed in Oklahoma region than in any other region. Enter Bass Reeves. A lot of marshals, their service about 5 years. He would serve for 30. 30 years as a marshal. He would work under Judge Parker. Judge Parker was called the hanging judge because you probably think about it, a lot of the criminals are going to get hanged. So that's who he was working for, was Judge Parker, the hanging judge. And Bass Reeves, he never learned how to read or write, but he had great skills in memorization. They would just give him the warrant, he would know what to do, and he'll find the assailant. no matter what. And he went on to large areas of covering more than 800 miles of just tracking people. And just, we don't know our distances. From here to LA is 100 miles, round trip 200. He's going 800 miles round trip through Indian territory. Very hostile. There's indigenous people that like him. There's some that don't like him. You have a lot of bandits out there. There's really no jurisdiction out there except for Bass Reeves. So he has a lot going on, and he's very successful. He goes on carries a small group with him. He has a wagon cook and a Native American posse, just to kind of keep him company on those treks, looking for these bandits. One story goes is he was tracking these two brothers who were wanted, and he knew that they were hanging out at their mom's house. So what he does is, he got his clothes, got them all dirty, shot his hat, and then walked over and he told his bossman, hey, go get the marshals, come back tomorrow morning with the marshals. So he walked up, miles to that mom's house, bangs on the door, and tells the mom, like, hey, Bass Reeves is after me. I'm a criminal. I need help. I need some food. And the mom, feeling very sympathetic because her boys are also criminals, allows him in, gives him food. She gives a signal to let the brothers, her sons know that, hey, it's okay, come on by. And so they come out and they just talk and they just have a good time. And in the morning, both brothers are handcuffed to the bedpost and the marshals are there without even taking out a gun. Another instance is three brothers, the three-brother bandit group, the Brunson brothers, caught Bass Reeves unexpectedly. They got him. All guns pointed at him, that stereotypical Mexican standoff. They had him. And so, he's pretty much done. So what Bass Reeves does is use his intellect. He's like, hey, what day is it? And the brother's like, what are you talking about, what day is it? It's like, well, I need to know the day so I sign the papers on the court order. What day is it? Because I'm bringing you in dead or alive. And they're laughing. Like, you're not going to While that commotion with the laughing, he pulls out his gun quickly, moves out of the other direction, kills the two brothers, and hits the butt of his gun, cracks the other brother's head down. Got out of that one. Now, Bass Reeves was quite the lawman, but doesn't mean that he wasn't above the law. He actually brought in his minister that baptized him. His minister was selling illegal liquor, brought him in. His own son, who murdered his wife. Judge Parker even said, Reeves, I'm not going to give you this one. And Bass Reeves said, no, I'm getting him. And so Bass Reeves would go get his son, find his son, bring him in. Luckily for his son, he served good time, will leave on a good sentence, never did anything bad again. But again, nothing was above the law for Bass Reeves. He'll eventually, kidney problems, eventually retire basically from the marshals, and eventually he will go join the local police department for about 2 years until he naturally passes, kidney disease, and passes away. But leaves this long legacy, and there is a legacy of was he the Lone Ranger, right? Did he inspire? No, there's one historian that does say that yes, he does. A lot of other stories, I don't know, right? I think Bass Reeves is a lot cooler than the Lone Ranger, a lot of the exploits. But there's similarities, but doesn't mean exactly the same. Yes, Bass Reeves had a white stallion, 2 pistols, was a master of disguise, like we saw when he captured the 2 brothers. But I think Bass Reeves' story is a lot more entertaining than that recent 2013 one with Johnny Depp. That was bad. That was horrible. That was horrible. So, but Bass Reeves is coming back onto cinema. The Yellowstone TV series. What's his name? Kevin Costner series. Yeah, they're doing a Bass Reeves series. A short Bass Reeves special. Morgan Freeman actually bought the rights of a story of Bass Reeves. He wants to bring him to life. And so, Bass Reeves is coming. So, stay tuned, right? Bass Reeves is coming. But I think that Yellowstone spin-off is coming sooner than the Morgan Freeman one.
His son.
And so anyway, just going to wrap up. He arrested over 3,000 outlaws during his time. One more famous one was a notorious cowgirl named Bella Starr, who actually worked with Jesse James with a lot of racketeering, a lot of horse theft, and he caught her, and he's quoted saying, "No one was more unruly than this young lady in capturing." But Bass Reeves never shot a man when it was not necessary for him to do so, in discharge of his duty to save his own life. So he'd rather use his wits than use his gun, right? So he's a very smart individual, and so Bass Reeves will be coming soon again to our motion picture. So we're going to be wrapping up with one of our last ones, Bill Pickett. Bill Pickett, born after the Civil War period, during Reconstruction era, and he's in Texas again. Another Texas, oh boy. And so what we have is he's learning the skills of riding and roping. And he does it so well that he notices how dogs, cattle dogs, take down steer. It's by biting the lip of the cow and bring them down. So he does that too. I don't advise it. It sounds icky. If I'm doing the research, I'm like, no. So anyway, but by him doing that, he'll actually start the process of the cattle wrestling, or doggy wrestling, bringing the cows down. That is the routine they do in rodeos. He did that. He started that. But by his successfully imitating what the dogs take and bringing down the cattle, he did that too. So he would go on and do a lot more performances. A lot of rodeo shows. He would travel. He would travel around the world as well. They actually had 2 silent films with him in it as well. So he was gaining a lot of popularity, a lot of notoriety. He wasn't allowed to participate in a lot of rodeo shows, though. A lot of Jim Crow laws. They'll say you can do it after hours, or you can do it on a day where no one's going to show up and stuff. So even though, despite those Jim Crow laws, he has a lasting legacy. And that legacy, lives on with the with the Bill Pickett Invitational Rodeo. He was given an honorary Hall of Fame with the rodeo organization. And what we start to see is more and more people of color, especially within the black community, embracing again this lost cowboy heritage, this lost cowboy story, or just like the ones that have been talked about. For instance, we have the Compton Cowboys, who literally have a ranch in Compton, California. Compton, we think about gangs and violence, but there are a lot of other good things happening in Compton as well. How do we get these young men, from the gangs, and how do we, teach them history? How to be proud of your culture, and you have the Compton Cowboys giving these young men and women an opportunity on the weekends, and even after school, to learn about horse riding, and just to be a community that's outside of gang violence. And this is not just in Compton. There's different communities, and predominantly black communities, like Philadelphia. There's even one in, an organization in South Carolina. It's a nonprofit. This young lady is trying to raise awareness to a lot of the equestrian lifestyle that blacks have, and to raise money for children, coloring books as well. I have that on my other PowerPoint, and I can share that also with Mr. Rossi as well after. But this is the lasting legacy that we have. I probably had too much coffee because I'm at the Q&A part of my presentation. So thank you for hearing me ramble on for 30 so minutes. Questions, comments? That Netflix movie, like I said, is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. It's not sexual violence, but it is violent. First 5 minutes, but if you can get past that, it's a fairly good story. Has a lot of interesting individuals, like Stagecoach Mary, who we didn't talk about, was very fascinating individual as well. So hopefully this inspires you also to look and find out more about this untalked about history as well. Yes, sir.
They're doing a lot of this stuff on the Inspiration Channel. I don't know if people know about the Inspiration Channel, if you have DirecTV, but there, a lot of these folks you talked about were on the Inspiration Channel. They have a special series on that.
Oh, nice.
And it's on DirecTV, and it's called the Inspiration Channel.
Thank you for sharing that. I was not aware of that. That's so cool.
It's on DirecTV. It's
okay.
360 something.
Okay.
364.
Spectrum is 87.
Respect for safe seven, okay. All right, the inspiration channel. Yes?
I just wanted to know, when you were talking about the slaves being allowed to come with the white masters, so there was no children of slaves being slaves in Texas, or was there? That's my question.
Oh, I see.
So the slaves that came with them, were their children slaves, or were they freed because they were then Mexican citizens, and if I'm remembering what you said right, and should have been free?
That is a great question, and I don't know. I seriously don't know, and that's something I need to look up. You would think they would be, but I have a feeling it's not.
Yeah,
I think more of the institution is to spread out to like the Tejanos and the other people out there, other Mexicans living in that area. So I think they would still enforce slavery in that way, because how the slave codes and laws were, it follows the status of the mother. Because everything else follows the dad. But it's only slavery follows the status of the mother. So if the woman is a slave, it's going to continue it on. So it's and you have to keep in mind too, now even though the Mexican government abolished slavery, there's also racial laws also in Mexico as well. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know the direct answer, but I would think that it would allow for the Anglo masters to maintain the children of slaves to be in servitude. Yes.
What year did Mexico abolish slavery?
That was 1821. Was right during independence. It was during it was not Hidalgo. It was the other gentleman, Guerrero. During his tenure that he abolished. So around the 1820s, like between 1821 and 1825, they abolished slavery in one of their political documents. Yes.
I just wanted the name of the movie, I didn't get it to be able,
Harder they fall.
harder
They fall.
they fall.
Harder
Okay,
they
thank
fall.
you.
You got it.
Do you teach, I hope you do you teach this section in your classes?
I do.
And what's their response?
It's good. I don't get any negative responses. A lot of the cultural heritage month celebrations I do is to kind of inspire my lectures as well. So a lot of times you can talk about slavery, and a lot of it's just like, oh, but you want to talk about the cultural contributions. You want to talk about the heroes. You want to talk, you got to talk about the negative stuff. We want to talk about, the bright stuff as well. So a lot of times, learning about Bass Reeves was so much fun. So I was like, this guy's amazing. I always had a handlebar mustache. Reminds me of my grandfather, his big old mustache. So I get good responses. I haven't received any negative responses.
You're breaking down stereotypes, which is beautiful.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Are there any records about some of the Black Vacqueros, starting their own ranches and being successful, creating their own?
Off the top of my head, I do not know. And you have to keep in mind too, like during this period, you have a lot of the Jim Crow laws.
Right.
And so that's going to prohibit a lot. A lot of why they became cowboys was to leave, Alabama, Mississippi, where they would, because of the black codes, not been allowed to have land. So they could have at least a place where they could wander with the Indian territory and not be kind of, shackled down again.
Yeah.
But as far as ranches and stuff, I would say that's going to be a lot harder to do. I mean, if you think about it too, like here in our story, California, a lot of the Californios that had their land removed because of the federal government as well, to allow more settlers to come in and take away. So I would think it would be a lot harder for a lot of free black cowboys to have their own land during that period.
But rodeos were open to black and white.
Not to blacks. Even like Bill Pickett, he wasn't allowed to participate. Even though he's now in the Rodeo Hall of Fame, he wasn't allowed to participate. He'll say, hey, you can do it after hours, or you can do it on Sunday when no one's there. But they would not allow it. You had a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, you said that they started as slaves in the Texas area, and then they obviously went through the Midwest. But what about the western part of the United States? There are a lot of cattle ranches here. Did they also go west and infiltrate the cattle ranches here as well?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of, because you're going to have the history of California is going to be a lot different than the history of Texas.
Right.
And so it's going to be a lot different. They'll eventually make their way out west, that we'll see, but not as much as we'll see in that Texas panhandle to do the work. Because a lot of California is going to have its own tension. I mean, you're going to have the gold rush going to bring people to California, right? And then you're going to have the infighting with the settlers and the indigenous people, and then the Mexican settlers. So you're going to have a different story. So with all of that violence, like, you know, it might be safer just to do the cattle driving in the Indian Territory than to deal with a lot of the effects going on, like in LA at this time. But I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, you mentioned Deadwood, who's all the way up in South Dakota, so they really
They moved.
infiltrated that area.
Yes, yeah, the great migration. So yeah, they migrate as far as possible. So there's, yeah, they will come out here, but not like in vast groves. Not in vast groves.
That, one of those guys who wrote a book, Stand Love,
Oh yeah, Nat Love.
Nat Love,
Uh-huh.
is that book still available, or?
I would think so. I know, to be honest, I didn't Google it.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure you can find it. Like one of the videos I was watching actually had a copy of it, like a front cover of it. So I'm sure it's available. I'm sure if you look on Amazon or Google Books, I'm sure it's available. And it's before copyright, so you might even get it for free, like on Google.
Maybe the Internet Archive or something.
Yeah.
Could you go back to that slide on the trails?
Sure.
I can only read one of them. It's
Could you, read the names of them?
Yeah. There's the Good Night Loving Trail. That's actually the trail that Nat Love was on. The Good Night Loving Trail,
Chisholm Trail.
the Western Trail, the Chisholm Trail, and the Shawnee Trail.
Chisholm Trail went up to, that's a railhead there?
Abilene.
Abilene.
It was split off to Ellsworth.
What did it split off into?
The Chisholm Trail was split off right by Oklahoma area. The Texas Panhandle was split off. One will go to Abilene, one will go to Ellsworth. It's like a little fork.
Can you read the bottom parts where it started, San Antonio, what was the next one?
Bandera,
Okay,
and then the other one's San Angelo.
okay.
Y'all getting ready for your cross-country trips?